So I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Keith May, especially since I just found out he has a connection to Cincinnati. So that's awesome. Dr. May, we're so happy to have him here today. We're lucky to get his time. He became the Vice President of Continuing Certification at the American Board of Pediatrics in early 2019. And he has served on the ABP's Maintenance of Certification Committee since 2013 and has chaired that committee since 2016. And he's also been a volunteer on various ABP committees for the past 19 years. Dr. Mann graduated from New Jersey Medical School and completed his residency and fellowship in internal medicine and pediatrics at Christiana Care Health System, Al DuPont Hospital for Children, after which he was chief resident in pediatrics at Thomas Jefferson University, DuPont Hospital for Children. He earned a master's degree in education from the University of Cincinnati in Cincinnati, Ohio, that was a partnership with Cincinnati Children's. So he will talk to us about MOC through the ABP. And during his talk, if you'll please add any questions that you have or any comments, we will direct them to Dr. Mann. Dr. Mann, thank you so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Kelsey. Appreciate the invite. And honestly, thanks to the entire state chapter of Ohio for really being a pillar of advocacy and QI for the children of Ohio. It's really incredible, the work that you all do. And we heard a little bit about the firearm QI project, I think, at our last portfolio meeting, which we host annually at the ABP. So really just fantastic work. Great to be here with, and Kelsey, please feel free to put my email in the chat. And so if any of the residents have questions for me afterwards, feel free to reach out. And again, everybody on the call, residents included, please feel free to call me Keith. In the informal stages of my life here. So again, thanks for the invite. And can you go forward one slide, please? So I'm going to talk a little bit today about something that you may not hear much of during residency. It's about your expectations and your requirements once you pass the initial certification exam. So once you pass that, and if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. Once you pass the initial certification exam, you enter something called maintenance of certification or continuing certification. Here's just a quick snapshot of our website. Anything I talk about today is available at abp.org. But what I will also do for a couple of the slides is actually have QR codes. So if you have your phones available, you can use those to take a picture of the QR code and then link to some of the slides. So go forward to the next slide, please. So just real briefly, who's the ABP? So I didn't know this when I was in training. So there's obviously a difference between the AAP and the ABP. The AAP is the Advocacy and Educational Home for Pediatricians. And there are 60 state chapters. Ohio is one. But the ABP is the certifying body. It's the certifying body for the field of pediatrics, including general peds and 15 subspecialties. We're located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, about 3 miles from UNC and about 7 or 8 miles from Duke. So it's a great time year, most basketball seasons. And there's about 110 employees. About half of those or so are IT staff or contractors. There are 5 physicians that work there. But the reality is ABP is made up of physician volunteers. So there's over 400 physician volunteers. Those physician volunteers do everything from write every single question that's on the exams to helping set the passing score for exams in a process called standard setting, to setting the content for the exams in a process called practice analysis, to advising the ABP, me specifically, on continuing certification. There's pediatricians that make up our board of directors. So the reality is the ABP is all of us. The ABP is you. If you ever are interested in volunteering, there's a volunteer button right on our website, and we'd love to have you involved as you go throughout your careers. Next slide, please. So to jump a little bit just into the nuts and bolts of continuing certification. So your continuing certification starts the moment you pass the general pediatrics exam. And it's made up of kind of 4 components. The first is professionalism, and we really monitor that by just making sure you maintain a valid medical license with the states that you're practicing in. And then there's 3 components which I'll spend most of my time on today. The self-assessment component, which is very similar to CME. An exam component, which now is offered an online longitudinal assessment called MOCA-PEDS, and then quality improvement. Next slide, please. And then can you just go forward two more? There's two animations. Thank you. So again, you can use the QR code to find this graphic with a lot more information. This is just a graphical of your MOC cycle. So for within the 5-year cycle, the requirements include maintaining a valid medical license, getting 50 Part 2 points, which is very similar to 50 hours of CME, and I'll mention some of the slight differences in a minute. 50 Part 4 points, which is 50 QI points or improvement in professional practice, and there's some variation to QI that's allowed, and we're actually growing that program over time. And then you enroll in your next 5-year cycle. For your first 5-year cycle, after you pass the initial certification exam in general pediatrics, something called MOCA Peds will be available to you, but not required. Once you enter your second 5-year cycle, you'll have MOCA Peds available to you for the rest of your careers, and that can fulfill your exam requirement with us. So it's passing the general Peds or MOCA Peds every 5 years. And the only thing that duplicates if you happen to hold a specialty or multiple specialties is what's on the right-hand side of your screen. The 50 Part 2 and 50 Part 4 points, the QI and the self-assessment requirements are the same 1, 2, 3, or 4 certificates. Those things on the right-hand side of the screen, specifically the exam, is for every certificate. Next slide, please. And then go forward two more. So then we'll just talk about self-assessment briefly. There's different ways, sorry, you can go to the next one. There's different ways to get self-assessment requirements. So we've partnered with the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education. So the reality is most CME can also count for MOC Part 2. And when if your organization has aligned the two through the CME office, when you get CME, you also get MOC Part 2. It just shows up in your portfolio. So that's the easiest way. So things like national meetings, grand rounds, even your up-to-date searches, if you've linked your CME account and up to date with your account at the ABP, you'll be able to get MOC credit as well. So that's by far the most common way of getting credit. It's the most seamless way, and we have physicians with hundreds of MOC points because it's aligned with the ACCME. We also want to give you some credit for what you're doing that might not be CME aligned. So you can upload your resuscitation certificates like pediatric advanced life support, or actually claim credit for learning and diversity, equity, and inclusion because it's often not CME accredited. And lastly, we want to provide value to you. So we produce some activities that we give both MOC and CME credit for. Can you go forward one slide, please? The one I'll highlight here is called Question of the Week. This is an example that came out this summer. And actually, I didn't change the slide, but we just changed the word monkeypox to mpox as the disease changed its name. But this is, again, a 5-year-old pustular with skin lesions. Could this be monkeypox? What follows this question is a multiple choice question with then an abstract from the literature, a 1,250 word summary. And then if you go forward one, at the end, some key takeaway points. So the idea that we try to release an article-based 1,250 word summary of a common topic once a week for 50 weeks of the year, and we try to time it with what's going on in the world to some degree, if we're able to. So when there was a measles outbreak, there was a measles question of the week. When there was polio found in the wastewater of New York City, there was a polio question of the week. So there's not always something that we can time it with, but if during, for example, Behavioral Mental Health Month, or we will have multiple topics related to depression, anxiety, ADHD, and other issues related to mental health of children. And so we try to keep it relevant, timely, and hopefully helps you keep up to date with the literature. Next slide, please. And then go forward another one. Now I'll briefly mention MOCA Peds. Again, yeah, sorry, you can go through one more. Which again is the in the past, you used to have to take a proctored exam at a prometric testing center every 7 years for the rest of your life. And obviously we got feedback that wasn't the ideal way to learn and was frankly not the ideal way to assess pediatricians. So 5 years ago, we introduced MOCA Peds, which focuses on both assessment, our ability to assess medical knowledge at the individual level, but also helps you learn. Can you go forward one more? So we will introduce up to 17 questions per quarter for each certification area that you have. It can be delivered via the web or a mobile device. We will do this for your entire 5-year MOC cycle. As again, I mentioned the first cycle, it's optional for you. I will say we have some data that suggests the more you do it, the more comfortable you get and the better you get. So it's worth at least playing with it a little bit during those first 5 years as a learning tool and a practice tool. And again, during your second 5 years, what we'll do is we will score you only on your top 12 quarters. So we'll drop your 4 lowest performing quarters. And then at the end of the 4th year, if you haven't passed yet, you have the whole 5th year to do the proctored exam in a testing center if you wish. And so again, the goal is to have something that helps you learn as well as provides flexibility for you in your life. Next slide. So to maximize learning, we'll also introduce 1 to 4 new articles per year. They're chosen by experts in the field. We don't have questions on those articles until the 2nd quarter, so you have the whole 1st quarter to read them. For general pediatrics, they are almost always evidence-based guidelines. You can use resources. You can have UpToDate pulled up. You can search the answer. You just can't do this with a colleague. It is an assessment of individual knowledge. And then there are repeat questions. So 15 questions a year will be repeat questions. After each question, we'll ask you how confident you are you got it right and how relevant it is to your practice. If you got a question wrong that's relevant to your practice, especially if you were confident you thought you got it right, you're guaranteed to see it again. We provide your old questions, so we encourage you to look back at all your wrong questions before you start a new quarter. It just increases the likelihood that you'll learn and then get it right the next time. So the goal is this is really to help you both learn and to help us assess your knowledge. And then the next slide, please. And as I mentioned, there's still the option to take the traditional exam if you wish. Next slide. And then one more. So lastly, I'll just talk about the quality improvement requirement. You can go forward one more. So I'll start here. One saying that you do QI during residency. You can actually bank that quality improvement project so it can count towards your first MOC cycle. And so again, it's 50 points, which is essentially the equivalent of 2 projects. So if you do one project during residency, bank it, you're already halfway there. If you do a second project during residency, bank that, you're already done with the QI requirement for your first MOC cycle. And that QR code can shed more details on that. So go forward one slide. So where you begin to find this is if you actually may or may not know, once you pass the in-training exam, you actually have an ABP account. This is what it looks like from a resident view. And if you wanted to do question of the week, you would simply search MOC Part 2 activities. We don't give you Part 2 credit as a resident, but you can do it for learning. But search MOC Part 4 activities, you can actually submit a small group QI application. And actually one person submits an application and up to 10 people can get credit for that work. Next slide. Lastly, I will say really briefly, we're evolving the Part 4 program, the QI program, so there will be more opportunities that evolve over time. Advocacy is something that's on our radar. It's important to your chapter, and we're discussing how to give physicians credit for that work as well. What I also lastly will say is don't ever feel like you can't reach out to us. We have customer service staff, moc@abpeats.org. We can log onto your portfolio with you and help you at any time. So I'll stop there and answer any questions. Thanks so much for inviting me.